"You're too old for the Maldives. Just watch the house," Lauren said, her voice light, casual, as though she were doing me a favor by excluding me. The words hung in the air a second too long, and then came the laughter. Bradley chuckled first, followed by his parents, Walter and Margaret, the same people who had been living rent-free in my home for months. Even my daughter joined in, her smile rehearsed, her laughter sharp. I sat there at my own dining table, hands folded, listening to their mirth rattle against the walls of the house I'd paid off 30 years ago. The brochures lay open in front of them, bright blue waters and overwater villas shimmering under the lamp. Margaret traced her manicured finger over a photo of a white sand beach. "This one looks perfect. Private pool, sunrise view." Walter nodded in agreement, sipping from the mug of coffee I had poured for him. Bradley leaned in, his arm draped casually over my daughter's shoulders, as though this trip had been his idea all along. I reached for one of the brochures, but Lauren intercepted me, pressing it flat against the table. "Dad, really, it's too far. Too much for you. Just stay here and keep an eye on the place." The sting was sharper than I let on. Walter was older than me by nearly 10 years, his knees worse than mine, and Margaret's health was fragile enough that she kept an inhaler in her purse. Yet somehow I was too old. Somehow they were perfect travel companions. I leaned back in my chair, nodding slowly. "Of course," I murmured. "Someone has to keep things running here." They carried on without me. Bradley scrolled through his phone, comparing flight times. Margaret discussed spa packages with Lauren. Walter laughed loudly about snorkeling. My presence in the room didn't matter. I was furniture, a background figure who happened to own the roof over their heads. I remembered when Lauren was 7, how she used to beg me for bedtime stories. She would curl up against me, her small hand clutching my arm, her eyes wide with wonder as I read her fairy tales. That little girl would never have left me behind. That little girl would have insisted I come along. But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who now measured family in terms of convenience and inheritance. After dinner, they left the brochures scattered across the table. I picked one up, studied the turquoise water, the wooden villas standing proudly above the ocean. Sarah, my late wife, had always wanted to see the Maldives. She used to cut pictures from travel magazines, tucking them into a scrapbook of someday dreams. That scrapbook was still in the top drawer of my dresser, untouched since the day she passed. I felt a lump in my throat as I realized. The trip Sarah had longed for, the trip we never took, my daughter now planned with her husband and his parents, without me. That night, as the house settled into silence, I lay awake in Sarah's old spot on the bed. The floor creaked below, faint voices rising through the vents. I tried not to listen, but certain phrases pierced the quiet. "Perfect timing," Bradley's voice said. "Once we're back, it'll be all lined up," Lauren replied. Margaret's laugh followed. "He'll never see it coming." I froze, staring into the darkness. My pulse slowed, each beat heavy and deliberate. I slid quietly off the bed and moved toward the vent, careful not to let the boards complain beneath my weight. Their voices carried clearer now. "We'll put him somewhere safe," Walter said matter-of-factly. Sunset Manor had an opening next month. Margaret already spoke to the administrator. My breath caught in my chest. Sunset Manor, a nursing home. "And the house?" Bradley asked. Lauren answered without hesitation. "Already spoke to Zachary. He thinks we can get at least 500, maybe more. Market's strong right now. We'll split it 4 ways. Silence pressed against my ears. 4 ways. My daughter, her husband, his mother, his father. Splitting my home, my life, my memories like a pie at Sunday dinner. I sank onto the edge of the bed, gripping the mattress until my knuckles turned white. For years, I'd fed them, sheltered them, covered their bills when Bradley's ventures collapsed. I'd sat through their excuses, their promises of repayment, their talk of better days. And now, I was nothing more than a burden to be set aside, a house to be liquidated. I stayed there until their voices faded into laughter again, until the front door slammed and I heard Bradley's car pull out of the driveway. When quiet finally returned, I opened my dresser drawer, pulled out Sarah's old jewelry box, and lifted the papers beneath it. The deed, the savings records, the documents that tied me to this place. I studied them for a long while under the dim lamp. Then I returned everything exactly where it had been. My reflection stared back at me from the vanity mirror. The man in the glass was older, yes, but not weak. Not yet invisible. They believed they had me cornered. They believed kindness meant ignorance. But I was a teacher once. And teachers know. Some lessons can't be given gently. Some have to be earned the hard way. Tomorrow, I thought, as I turned off the lamp and sat back in the dark, the lesson would begin. The morning after their late-night plotting, I acted as if nothing had happened. Lauren was already in the kitchen, humming while she arranged documents into neat piles. Boarding passes, hotel confirmations, a rental car receipt. Bradley scrolled through his phone, muttering about flight times. Walter and Margaret sipped my coffee, commenting on sunscreen brands as if this were their home. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table. To them, I looked like an old man enjoying his morning routine. In reality, every sound, every word they exchanged, carved itself into my memory. They were planning their trip, yes, but more importantly, they were planning my disappearance. "Dad, can you water the plants while we're gone?" Lauren asked without looking up. Her tone was bright, almost sing-song. "Maybe check the mail, too?" I nodded. Of course. Her words lingered in my head. Not a single request about caring for myself. Just tasks to keep the house running smoothly, the house they already believed was theirs. After breakfast, I walked quietly into the garage. Dust hung in the morning light slanting through the window. Boxes of their belongings were stacked high, things they never bothered to unpack. Old toys, broken appliances, bags of clothes. They had filled my space, piece by piece, until I barely recognized it. On the workbench sat Sarah's gardening tools. I ran my fingers over the worn wooden handles. She used to spend hours in the backyard, coaxing roses into bloom, her hands dirt-stained but proud. She would never have tolerated this. She would have spoken up the moment our daughter tried to dismiss me as too old. But Sarah wasn't here, and I had to face the truth alone. That afternoon, Lauren came in from the porch, holding her phone. She didn't see me in the hallway. "Zachary says we should list it while the market's hot," she whispered to Bradley. "Perfect," he said. "We'll sign once we get him settled." I froze, pressed against the wall until they moved past. The name Zachary stuck with me. A real estate agent, most likely. They weren't just talking. They were already taking steps. I spent the rest of the day moving through the house like a ghost. I cooked dinner, I asked about their trip, I laughed at their small jokes. But inside I was making lists. Documents, accounts, deeds, savings. Things they knew about and things they didn't. That night, I retrieved Sarah's old expense notebook. She had told me to keep track after she passed. Page after page showed the same pattern. Groceries for them, utilities doubled since they moved in, car repairs, tuition payments. My handwriting carried every sacrifice. And now my reward was exile. When the house finally went quiet, I opened the drawer again and pulled out the deed. My thumb pressed against the embossed seal. This house was built on my labor, my savings, my years of patience. It wasn't theirs to sell. I placed the papers back, carefully, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. They thought I was weak, harmless, a man who would nod along until he was shipped away. But teaching for decades had trained me differently. I knew how to wait. I knew how to let arrogance blind people until they revealed everything. They would leave for the Maldives in 3 days. That gave me 72 hours to decide how the story would end. The day after Lauren's whisper in the hallway, I decided to keep even closer watch. I woke earlier than usual, the house still quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Coffee in hand, I sat at the table with Sarah's old notebook open. Each line of expenses reminded me how deep I'd let them dig into my pockets. Bills doubled, loans, just until next month. Promises of repayment that dissolved into silence. I traced the ink with my finger and wondered if Sarah would have told me I'd been too generous. The stairs creaked. Bradley entered, scratching his head, moving with the lazy confidence of someone who believed the house was already his. He went straight for the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, and leaned against the counter as if it belonged to him. "Morning, Pops," he muttered, eyes on his phone. "Morning." He scrolled a moment, then said, almost offhand, "You ever think about downsizing? This place is a lot for you to handle." I sipped slowly. "Handle in what way?" "Well, yard work, repairs, bills. Wouldn't it be easier to move somewhere smaller? Somewhere with assistance?" His tone was light, but his glance lingered on me a little too long. "Like Sunset Manor?" I asked softly. The words landed like a stone. His eyes flicked up, sharp. "What?" "Nothing," I replied, keeping my face blank. He gave a forced laugh. "Right, well, just a thought." Then he grabbed his mug and disappeared, but the tremor in his voice told me he knew. He knew I wasn't as blind as they hoped. By midday, Lauren appeared at the study door. She rarely came in here, but now her eyes swept over the shelves, pausing on the locked drawer where I kept the deed. She smiled too brightly. "Dad, if something ever happened to you, would you want me to handle the house? Bills, paperwork, all that?" "Why?" I asked, closing Sarah's notebook. "Well, it'd be simpler. Less stress for you. I've managed fine this long." Her smile faltered just a little before she recovered. "Of course, just thinking ahead." Then she slipped away. When the house emptied later that evening, Bradley taking Walter out for errands, Margaret fussing over travel lists, I walked the rooms in silence. Their belongings cluttered my garage. Their voices filled my kitchen. But the spirit of the place still belonged to Sarah. Her roses in the yard, her quilt in the living room, her favorite chair by the window. They saw square footage and market value. I saw a life. I paused at the hallway mirror. The man staring back wasn't helpless. He was patient, deliberate. A teacher who'd learned long ago that the most important lessons came only when arrogance blinded the student. That night, as the house settled, I lay awake again. Through the vent came muffled voices. Margaret's laugh, Walter's low hum, and then Lauren. "Dad really thinks he's just house-sitting. By the time we're back, Zachary will have everything ready." Bradley added, "And once he's moved into Sunset, it's ours. Clean, simple." Their confidence washed over me like ice water. They weren't just dreaming anymore. They were counting down. I closed my eyes, forcing my breath to steady. Let them laugh. Let them believe I was docile. They didn't realize that every word was fuel. Every slip another brick in the wall I was building around myself. They had 2 days left before their flight. 2 days before the lesson began. 2 mornings before their flight, the house was already buzzing. Suitcases stood half-packed in the hallway, bright beach clothes draped over chairs, bottles of sunscreen lined on the counter as if we were running a pharmacy. The excitement in their voices filled every corner, and I let it all wash over me like static. Lauren sat at the table, flipping through a folder of travel documents. "Dad, remember, water the plants, check the mail, and don't forget to call the exterminator about the garage." I left the number on the fridge. She didn't look up as she spoke, just issued instructions as though I were a hired caretaker. "Of course," I replied. Bradley appeared with a new duffel bag, still bearing the store's tag. "Pops, don't worry about the bills. Lauren and I can take care of those once we're back. Less hassle for you." I stirred my coffee. "I think I'll manage." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself." Margaret and Walter entered then, already dressed for warm weather, though the Florida heat outside was plenty. They carried their excitement like trophies. "This is the trip of a lifetime," Walter said, slapping Bradley on the back. "Can't believe we're really doing it." I listened, nodded, played the role of quiet spectator. But inside, my mind ticked like a clock. Later, when they left to shop for last-minute items, I finally had the house to myself. I moved through each room deliberately, opening drawers, checking locks, ensuring that everything important was exactly where I'd left it. The deed, the savings records, Sarah's notebook, still safe, still under my control. In the living room, I paused at the shelf where family photos once stood. Most were gone, packed away or replaced by Lauren's modern decorations. But one frame remained. Sarah, holding baby Lauren in the hospital, both smiling as if the world couldn't touch them. I ran a hand over the glass. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. The truth was, I did too. That evening, Bradley returned first. He lingered in the doorway of my study, pretending casual curiosity. "Whatcha working on?" "Reading," I said simply, closing the book. His eyes flicked to the locked drawer, then back to me. "You know, Dad, sometimes it's easier to let people help. We could make things a lot smoother for you." "I'm sure you could," I answered. My voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone that gave nothing away. He forced a smile and left. At dinner, the table buzzed with talk of boat tours and underwater restaurants. Margaret laughed about how many swimsuits she was packing. Lauren leaned over to show Bradley photos of their upgraded suite. I chewed slowly, nodded at the right moments, but my thoughts were elsewhere. In 2 days, they would be gone. The car would pull away, the plane would lift into the sky, and I would finally be alone in my house again. Alone and free to move without their watchful eyes. That night, lying in bed, I heard them laughing downstairs. Bradley's voice carried, "By the time we're back, it'll all be wrapped up." Lauren's reply came soft but clear. "He doesn't suspect a thing." I stared at the ceiling, a faint smile tugging at my lips. That was the beauty of it. They thought I was blind. They thought I was waiting here like a harmless old man, ready to be tucked away. But teachers know patience, and I was ready to give them a lesson they would never forget. The night before their flight, I woke around 2 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. The house was restless. Luggage wheels scraped faintly against the hardwood. Zippers opened and closed, voices hushed but hurried. I stayed still, listening from the dark. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Margaret whispered. Lauren's reply floated through the vent above me. "He's clueless. He'll be grateful just to have some peace and quiet." Bradley chuckled. "By the time we're back, paperwork will be done, and he'll already be moved. He won't even know what hit him." Silence followed, then a door closed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my pulse steady. Their confidence was almost insulting. They truly believed they had won before the game had even begun. In the morning, I made breakfast as I always did. Eggs, toast, coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, covering the bitterness in my chest. Lauren breezed in first, dressed in light travel clothes, her excitement barely contained. "Morning, Dad. Did you sleep okay?" "Like a rock," I answered smoothly. Bradley followed, yawning, scrolling his phone. He poured coffee without asking, sat at the table as though it were his by right. Walter and Margaret joined moments later, their chatter filling the air. They ate quickly, distracted by departure checklists. I watched them, memorizing the small details. The way Bradley's knee bounced nervously under the table, the way Lauren avoided my eyes, the way Margaret tapped her ring against the mug when she thought no one was listening. People reveal more than they realize when they believe no one is paying attention. After breakfast, I offered to drive them to the airport. Bradley looked surprised, then relieved. "Actually, that'd be great, Pops. Uber canceled on us last time." "Happy to help," I said. My voice was calm, almost cheerful. The morning passed in a blur of last-minute packing. Suitcases by the door, travel documents checked and rechecked, voices raised in bursts of laughter. They looked like a family preparing for paradise. To anyone else, it would seem normal. But to me, every word, every movement carried another layer of betrayal. On the drive to Orlando International, I kept my eyes on the road while they chattered in the back seat. Margaret listed restaurants she wanted to try. Walter joked about deep-sea fishing. Lauren talked about the spa package, while Bradley promised he'd finally get some sun. Their voices blended into a chorus of selfish excitement. Not once did they ask if I'd be all right at home. Not once did they thank me for everything I had given. When we pulled up to the drop-off zone, Bradley clapped my shoulder. "Thanks, Pops. Don't worry, we'll bring you something nice. Lauren kissed my cheek quickly, already halfway out the door. Love you, Dad. Enjoy the quiet. I watched them wheel their luggage away, disappearing into the glass doors, laughter trailing behind them. For the first time in years, the house and the silence would be mine. On the drive back, I didn't turn on the radio. The hum of the engine was enough. My thoughts were sharp, focused. They believed they had left me behind like a caretaker watching over their future inheritance. But in truth, they had given me exactly what I needed: space, time, and freedom. When I walked into the empty house, the air felt different. No voices, no clutter of demands, no footsteps echoing through the hallways. Just me and the walls Sarah once painted, the rooms she once filled with warmth. I closed the front door softly, locking it behind me. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, because now, finally, the lesson could begin. The first night without them, the house breathed differently. No footsteps overhead, no voices echoing through the vents, no slammed doors. Just silence, a silence that belonged to me. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low, sipping coffee long gone cold. The clock ticked steadily. Sarah's quilt lay folded over the arm of the chair, the roses outside faintly visible in the moonlight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Their suitcases, their laughter, their arrogance were thousands of miles away. I pictured them in overwater villas, sipping cocktails, posting photos of turquoise seas. They thought they had left me behind to water plants and check the mail. But in truth, they had given me freedom. I started with the filing cabinet in the study. Unlocking it, I laid out each folder on the desk: deed, bank statements, insurance, tax records. I handled them carefully, the way I once graded essays, page by page, noting every flaw, every inconsistency. The story these papers told was one of work, sacrifice, and responsibility. Mine, not theirs. I thought back to the phone call years ago. Bradley sobbing, Lauren pleading, their voices breaking as they begged for a place to stay. Sarah had been gone less than a year, and the house was too quiet. I said yes without hesitation. I'd open my door, my wallet, my life, for them. And slowly, piece by piece, they had begun to erase me. But paper has memory. Ink doesn't forget. And neither did I. The next morning, I drove to the bank. The young teller smiled politely as I requested access to my safe deposit box. Inside were documents even Lauren didn't know existed. Old investments, a small nest egg Sarah and I had built, untouched since her passing. I checked each one, placed them neatly back, and left with a sense of calm. The essentials were already beyond their reach. Back home, I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Charlie, I said when the line picked up. David? Well, I'll be. It's been what, 5 years? His voice was gravelly, steady, the same as when we used to fish on weekends. Charlie was a retired deputy, a man who'd seen enough lies to recognize the shape of one before it was finished. I need a favor, I said. He didn't hesitate. What kind? Quiet kind, just in case family decides to get greedy. There was a pause. Then he said, I'll come by tomorrow. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's notebook open again. I added a new entry. Flight leaves Thursday morning. 2 weeks abroad. House finally mine again. I underlined the last sentence. The house creaked softly as the night settled. I walked through each room, closing doors, checking locks, as if sealing the house off from the world. In the mirror, my reflection seemed sharper than it had in years. Less like an old man waiting for instructions, more like a man preparing for battle. They believed they'd stripped me of control. They believed their absence left me powerless. But the truth was simpler. Their absence gave me room to breathe, to plan, to act. In 2 weeks, they would return expecting the same house, the same old man, the same inheritance ready for their taking. They would find none of it. Charlie arrived the next afternoon in his old pickup, the same one he'd driven back when we used to fish at the lake. The truck rattled into the driveway, sun glinting off its dented hood. He stepped out slowly, wearing his sheriff's cap even though he'd retired years ago. Some habits never leave. "You look the same, David," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Maybe a little meaner in the eyes." "Life will do that to you," I replied. We sat on the porch, coffee steaming in chipped mugs. I told him everything. Lauren's words, Bradley's smug suggestions about downsizing, the whispers through the vent, the name of the realtor already lined up. I didn't dramatize it, just facts, straight and cold. Charlie listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with each detail. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Sounds like they're setting you up for a clean sweep. Nursing home, quick sale, pocket the cash." "That's the plan," I said. He leaned back, eyes narrowing toward the yard. "What do you want from me? Protection? Evidence? Or just someone who believes you're not crazy?" I met his gaze. "Evidence. And time." Charlie nodded. "I can give you both." He opened the back of his truck and pulled out a small duffel. Inside were things I hadn't expected to see again. Tiny pinhole cameras, a recorder, even a few blank legal forms. "I kept some toys," he said, almost apologetic. "Didn't think I'd use them again. But here we are." That evening, we set them up quietly. A camera above the living room bookshelf. Another in the hallway near my study. One more in the garage where Bradley always pretended to fix things. They blended into the shadows, invisible unless you knew where to look. "Won't take long," Charlie said. "Greedy people always talk too much." After he left, the house felt even quieter. The equipment hummed faintly, silent witnesses waiting for voices to betray themselves. I walked through the room slowly, checking angles, adjusting shadows. It was meticulous work, and it steadied me. Later, I sat at Sarah's desk with a stack of blank paper. My hands moved carefully, copying the format of documents Bradley and Lauren might expect me to sign. A transfer authorization, property downsizing form. They weren't real, at least not in the way they thought. Charlie had told me what to write, how to bury clauses inside legal jargon. Clauses that would give me full control, freeze accounts, void signatures if coercion could be proven. I stared at the paper when I finished. My name sat neatly at the bottom, penned in my deliberate script. It looked real enough to pass at a glance. That was the point. The next morning, I went about my routine as though nothing had changed. Coffee, toast, a walk in the yard. Neighbors waved, and I waved back, the same old man in the same old house. But inside, the walls now had ears, and my desk held a trap waiting for signatures they thought would ruin me. In the evening, I called Lauren. She answered quickly, laughter in the background, waves crashing faintly through the phone. "Dad, everything okay at the house?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Just thinking about what you mentioned. Downsizing, paperwork. Maybe it's time I consider it." I heard the pause, the way her voice sharpened. "Really?" "Yes, we'll talk when you're back." Her relief was almost palpable. "That's wonderful, Dad. You won't regret it." "I'm sure I won't," I said softly. We ended the call and I placed the phone on the counter. For a moment, I stared out the window at the darkened yard. Their plan was in motion, yes, but so was mine. And the difference was mine had no room for error. The days slid by in silence, each one sharpening my resolve. Without their noise, the house seemed to breathe easier. The roses in the backyard bloomed untouched. The kitchen counters stayed clean. And for the first time in years, the refrigerator held only my food. I lived as Sarah and I once had, quietly, deliberately, every detail in its place. Each night, I reviewed the recordings. The cameras caught plenty before they left. Lauren rifling through my desk drawers, Bradley running a hand across the safe, Walter muttering about, "When the sale goes through." They hadn't even tried to hide it. Their entitlement was so complete they thought no one would ever question it. Charlie came by twice that week, each time under some casual excuse. He took the memory cards, backed them up, and assured me the evidence was stacking in my favor. "By the time they set one foot back in this house," he said, "you'll have enough to bury them legally, or just scare the hell out of them. Your choice." That night, I sat at the dining table with the forged documents spread neatly across the surface. The lamp cast a warm glow on the pages, highlighting every false line, Every trap hidden in plain sight. Property transfer authorization. Durable power of attorney. Even a downsizing agreement. Each one designed to look legitimate, but every clause bent back toward me. If they signed, they'd be signing their own undoing. I left them in a neat folder on my desk. Nothing suspicious, just organized enough to tempt greedy eyes. On the 10th day, I received a postcard from the Maldives. A photo of turquoise water and palm trees. On the back, Lauren's handwriting. Dad, the trip is amazing. Relax at home, we'll celebrate when we're back. Love, L. The words dripped with the same casual dismissal she'd used before. I pinned the postcard to the fridge, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. They believed me harmless. That was their mistake. The next evening, I walked through the garage, reorganizing tools. Most of the shelves were cluttered with their things. Bradley's broken golf clubs, Margaret's boxes of china, Walter's rusted fishing gear. I stacked them neatly to the side, clearing space until the garage looked like mine again. With each object I moved, the bitterness drained out of me and hardened into something colder. Resolve. I thought of Sarah, of her quiet strength, the way she had carried us through lean years with nothing but patience and dignity. She would have told me to stand my ground. She would have reminded me that kindness never meant surrender. 2 days before their return, Charlie stopped by once more. We sat on the porch at dusk, the air heavy with the smell of roses. They'll be back soon, he said. I nodded. And when they are, they'll walk right into it. He studied me for a long moment. You ready for that? I sipped my coffee. I've been ready since the night I heard them laugh about Sunset Manor. He didn't press further. Some things didn't need explanation. When he left, I walked back inside and turned off every light except the one in my study. The folder sat on the desk, waiting. I placed a pen beside it, perfectly aligned. Everything looked ordinary. That was the beauty of it. As I stood in the doorway, I let the silence wash over me. In less than 48 hours, the house would be full again, voices, footsteps, demands. But this time, it wouldn't be me bending to their plans. It would be them bending to mine. They came back on a Sunday afternoon, sunburned and smiling, dragging their suitcases across my hardwood floors as if they owned the place. Lauren dropped her beach bag by the door and kissed my cheek quickly, already moving past me toward the kitchen. Dad, the Maldives were incredible, she gushed, pulling her phone out to show me pictures. Look, this was our villa and here's the spa. You'd have loved it, but it was a lot of travel. Too much for me, I said evenly. Bradley wheeled in the largest suitcase, letting it thud against the wall. House looks good, Pops. Glad you kept everything in order. His tone carried the smugness of a landlord inspecting a tenant's work. Walter and Margaret followed, already arguing about who had packed which souvenirs. Their laughter bounced through the house, filling it with the noise I hadn't missed. I stood quietly, letting them settle. Their excitement would burn out soon enough. It always did. At dinner, they told stories of snorkeling, fine dining, luxury I'd never been invited to share. Margaret described the buffet in detail. Bradley bragged about how much he'd tipped the waiters. Lauren's eyes sparkled as she talked about sunset boat rides. I nodded, chewed slowly, smiled where appropriate. But my thoughts were elsewhere, on the folder sitting neatly in my study, waiting. After dessert, Bradley leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a napkin. So, Pops, you been thinking about what we talked about? Downsizing? Making life easier? Lauren reached for my hand across the table. Dad, it really would be for the best. Less stress on you. More security. I set my fork down gently. Funny you mentioned that. I've been giving it serious thought. In fact, I drafted some paperwork while you were gone, just to get the ball rolling. Their faces lit up, just as I expected. Bradley's eyebrows shot up. Lauren squeezed my hand. Walter and Margaret exchanged quick glances, hungry as wolves catching scent of prey. Really? Lauren asked, almost breathless. Really? I said. It's all in my study. We can take a look now if you like. I led them down the hall, moving slowly, deliberately, my hand steady. The folder sat exactly where I'd left it, the pen aligned neatly on top. I opened it and slid the papers toward them. "Here," I said calmly. "Property authorization, transfer options, even a clause for downsizing. Just preliminary, of course. Nothing final." They gathered around the desk like children around candy. Bradley skimmed the first page, his lips curling in satisfaction. "This looks good," he muttered. Lauren leaned over his shoulder. "Dad, this is exactly what we need to make things smoother." Walter nodded, tapping the page. "Smart move. Better for everyone this way." I stood back, watching, silent. Their eyes flicked across the pages, but not one of them slowed down enough to truly read. "Greed doesn't bother with fine print. Why don't you go ahead and sign?" Bradley said, pushing the pen toward me. I took it, twirled it slowly between my fingers, then signed with steady strokes. The ink dried smoothly, black against white. I slid the pen back. "Your turn." Lauren hesitated only a second before she scribbled her name. Bradley followed quickly. Walter and Margaret signed last, each with the smug assurance of victory. I collected the pages, stacked them neatly, and slipped them back into the folder. "There," I said softly. "All taken care of." They exhaled in relief, exchanging smiles as though they'd just pulled off a heist. None of them realized what they had actually signed. That night, I sat in my room with the folder beside me. Their signatures shone under the lamplight. Proof of their greed. Proof of their betrayal. Proof that the trap had worked. They believed they had won. But the truth was, the game had only just begun. The next morning, the house smelled of fresh coffee and suntan lotion. Lauren was already in the kitchen, humming as she shuffled papers into her bag. Bradley leaned against the counter, smug and relaxed. Walter and Margaret sat at the table, discussing renovations they might make once things settled. They thought the signatures from last night had secured their future. They moved with the confidence of winners. I sat down slowly, folder in hand. Their eyes flicked to it, hungry. "Dad, we should probably call Zachary today," Lauren said. "Get the listing process started." Bradley added, "Yeah, the market's hot. No sense waiting." Walter grinned. "We'll have buyers lined up in no time." I placed the folder on the table, opened it, and slid the pages toward them. Their names glistened in black ink across the bottom lines. "You all signed quickly," I said, my voice calm. "Almost like you didn't bother reading." Bradley waved a hand dismissively. "We trust you, Pops. Besides, we knew what it was." I leaned back in my chair. "Did you?" Silence. I tapped the final page. "See this clause here? The one buried halfway down. Written in the legalese none of you bothered to notice? It states that all property and accounts remain under my sole authority. That any attempt at coercion or misrepresentation nullifies your claims. That your signatures are an admission of intent, not a transfer of power." Their smiles evaporated. Lauren leaned forward, scanning the text. Her lips moved as she read, the color draining from her face. "This isn't. It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted. My voice stayed steady. "You tried to take my house. You plotted to put me in Sunset Manor. You called it easier for me. But what you signed proves otherwise." Walter shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Bradley's jaw clenched, his bravado cracking. "Dad, you don't understand," Lauren started. "No," I said firmly. "I understand perfectly. I heard you. Through the vents, through your laughter, through every careless word you thought I was too old to notice. I know about Zachary. I know about your plan. And now I have your signatures admitting it." I reached into the folder and pulled out a smaller envelope. Inside were still frames from the cameras. Lauren rifling my drawers, Bradley testing the safe, Walter and Margaret whispering in the hallway. I spread them across the table one by one. Charlie's handwriting marked each with a date and time. Their silence was deafening. Bradley tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Walter looked down at his hands. Margaret's face went pale. Only Lauren managed to whisper, "Dad, we didn't mean." You meant every word. I cut in. And you signed every page. That's enough. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the folder. Then I stood, my knees steady despite the weight of years. You will pack your things, I said quietly. You will leave this house, and you will not return. Lauren's eyes filled, but I saw no remorse, only panic. Bradley looked ready to argue, but one glance at the photos silenced him. Walter muttered something about mistakes. Margaret dabbed her eyes, but I remained unmoved. This house is mine, I continued, built with my hands, paid for with my work, kept alive with Sarah's love. It is not your inheritance. It is not your escape plan, and it will never belong to you. By evening, their rooms were half empty. Suitcases thudded down the stairs. Doors slammed. At last, the front door closed with a final echo, leaving me alone in the quiet once more. I sat on the porch with Sarah's quilt over my lap, watching the sunset spread gold across the yard. For the first time in years, the house felt whole again. When I finally looked at my phone, the screen glowed with missed calls. Lauren's number, Bradley's, even Walter's. One after another, desperate attempts to claw back what they'd lost. The counter at the top read, 62 missed calls. I set the phone face down on the table beside me. The evening air was calm. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.